Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to class. Today we are going to talk about language planning. The word planning in itself is self-explanatory. That means there is a definite objective and goal behind a series of activities done to change, modify, or replace the status of a language in a society. So, when we say language planning, it also entails that there must be some agency which tries to influence and change the patterns of language use. Now, the question is, why do we need to plan? What is the use of language planning? Why it is done? Who does it? And what exactly we do in language planning? So, the motivating factors, the driving ideologies, the process of planning, and the outcome of planning. This is what we are going to discuss today in this class. Language planning as a discipline is a new discipline. So, without theorizing, we have been indulged in language planning since ages. But language planning as an area of study is a recent development compared to the history of human knowledge, right? So in this discussion, we'll try to understand what is planning, why do we do this, why do we in the first place need it, and then why do we do it, who does it, how it is done, and what is the outcome of such activities. So, this is what we are going to discuss today in our class in this module, language planning. And this module is focused on a series of such themes and topics like language planning, types of language planning, then we'll talk about constitutional provisions and official languages, particularly in the context of India. We'll talk about Schedule 8 of Indian Constitution. We'll talk about official languages of India. We'll talk about trilingual formula or three language formula in India. We'll talk about the process of standardization of language. So, this module will focus on all such themes and topics. So, let us begin with the idea or the concept phenomenon called language planning today. Einar Huygens was one of the first persons to use the term language planning in his seminal work on language standardization in Norwegian. This included issues such as orthography, the script, grammar, and lexicon in language planning initiatives. Now, language planning required, okay, I put it in quotes required, but language planning was felt to be a necessary step by neo-post-colonial societies post-World War II. And we see a number of societies, number of countries getting independence from colonial forces, and little chaotic linguistic order in these places. And there was a need felt post independence to formalize and plan the language use policy in these newly independent neo post colonial societies. So like Singapore, India is the greatest example for that. We got independence on 15th August 1947. And then there was if we will talk about it, that how a long debate took place in Constituent Assembly about languages of India, about official language of India, and the story of Hindi emerging as the preferred official language of India. Little linguistic conflicts followed, and then 1963 Official Language Act amendment in the Indian Constitution. A status of English in India as associate official language. So we'll talk about all these things in subsequent lectures. Language planning is also done to construct national identities, right? So this whole idea of one language, one nation theory and the concept, European concept. But South Asian societies are by and large multilingual. So identity was another issue, another reason, another factor, motivating factor to come up with a robust language planning. Then there are certain socio-political motivations. The linguistic, in order to ease linguistic tension, we need to revise the policy, accommodate new languages to the fold in multilingual societies. So we require planning for that and a series of activities to accomplish these goals. There are certain ideological issues like linguistic rights, right? Like to accommodate the voices of minority languages, particularly in multilingual societies where you have a sizable body of speakers of a variety of languages. And the beautiful case is India. India speaks in many languages and writes in many languages. And the provision for Schedule 8, scheduled languages in Indian Constitution reflects the multilingual nature of the society and also the acknowledgement by the government and the state to endorse multilingualism. The best, and it is best reflected in the constitutional provision of Schedule 8 of Indian Constitution, which recognizes 22 languages as official languages of India, apart from Hindi, the official language of the federal government, Union of States, and English as associate official language of the unions of state. Then new political order like globalization and new capital order also paved ways for other lesser known languages and non-dominant languages to occupy space in the linguistic ecology in the formal domain, and that also triggered planning. It also requires language planning. So there are multiple reasons why we need to have language planning. We will take some perspectives by different people, different scholars who have worked in the discipline and given a seminal contribution in development of this idea and the concept. If you go by Kaplan and Baldauf Jr. 1997, they say language planning is an initiative to extend function, structure, or acquisition of languages or language varieties within a speech community. So, more languages are included, right? And the functions of use are extended for them. If you look at Robert Cooper, 1989, says it is an activity of preparing a normative orthography, grammar, and dictionary for the guidance of writers and speakers in a non-homogeneous speech community. So you find planning to be sort of prescriptive initiative where the grammar rules are frozen, scripts are modified, and a standard, a benchmark is created for the rest of the users to look up to for as an ultimate source and reference. Because oral varieties are very dynamic and always in a flux. They change. But when you do work on orthographic representation, when you start writing in a particular script, the rules, the use, and the form freeze and they remain as standard form for the language users in various domains. Bernard Spolsky prefers to use the term language management. So he doesn't call it language planning. He prefers to use the word language management over language planning and defines language management as the explicit and observable effort by someone or some group or agency that has claims that claims authority over the participants in the domain to modify their practices and beliefs. So, with certain statutory authority, there is a deliberate intervention at various levels, right, to change the form and the use of language or language varieties. So, language planning is usually done by government agencies which claim a statutory authority, which has control over the users and which has resources to promote the newly developed, newly extended functions of a particular variety or language. Because it is done at a mass scale for the general use purpose. So there has to be an agency which has a statutory claim and which can implement or bring these initiatives into force. However, some agencies or some groups of people can also do it, communities can also do it, but ultimately they get their efforts are ratified by such government agencies. So, any agency, any force with a statutory authority can do it and does it. But it is not done purely in administrative function and fashion because such initiatives require inclusive effort and inclusive work. So they include scholars, linguists, right, different societies, different organizations for designing, developing, and extending the functions of language use. So it's a very integrated and multidimensional, right, initiative which is inclusive in nature and done at a massive scale, right. So when we talk about the process of standardization, we'll learn more about it. Now, the next point is that why do we need to have language management like Bernard Swolsky prefers, or to do language policy? What is the need for it? What are the major driving factors? What are the major driving forces which pushes us towards it? Uh, there are four factors recognized. Number one, internationalization. Number two, linguistic assimilation. Number three, linguistic pluralization. And number four, vernacularization. So these are the four major driving force factors identified and why we do this planning. So factor number one, internationalization, right? Factor number two, linguistic assimilation, particularly in multilingual societies. Linguistic pluralization, number three, third factor, where you promote more languages, multilingualism, and vernacularization, where you try to bring in an indigenous language, right, into formal domain in order to revive it and extend the functions of use, bringing it beyond the limitations of informal setting and bringing it to the forefront and making it formal. So these are the four driving forces why we uh, you know need to have language management or language planning. So when we say internationalization, it refers to the adoption of a non-indigenous language as a means for wider communication, right? Uh, when we say wider communication, non-indigenous means the language may not belong to the place. Language may not be native to the place, but for wider accessibility and for extending the functions of use, uh, we need or we adopt such a dominant language. And the best example is English in India, for that matter, in Singapore, in Philippines, in Papua New Guinea, South Africa. So all these post-colonial societies where we have English as an official language, other as one of the official languages. In India, English is associate official language for wider communication, right? International accessibility, and also because of the multilingual fabric, no single language emerged as a pan-Indian language, but the colonization process of India and colonization history of India of more than 250 years ensured that English emerges as lingua franca across all societies, and that made English associate official language of India. The similar case in Singapore, the similar case in Philippines, the similar case in South Africa, right? Papua New Guinea. These are all multilingual societies. So this is the first motivation. Then linguistic assimilation. Now this is ideologically driven uh, factor where it is believed that the members of a society, even if they have different linguistic background, a newly formed society must speak in the same language. So this is seen as assimilation, social and linguistic assimilation. And you can have an example of efforts by a small group in United States which advocates the use of English, and this group is known as English only in United States. They firmly believe that one language, one society, in that theory, in that idea, the idea of one language and one society. So for assimilation, they are demanding English to be made official language of United States. Interesting to see that United States is a democratic society, but they have not declared any particular language as their official language. So de facto, English is de facto official language of United States, but de jure, they have not decided, they have not declared it. The third factor for language planning is linguistic pluralism, and this is an inclusive idea that supports and promotes many languages, right? So in India, for that matter, Schedule 8, the Constitution of the Indian Constitution, supports and promotes inclusion of more languages as official languages of India. It started with 14 languages in 1950. Today we have 22 languages in the 8th schedule. They are called scheduled languages. So they have got a statutory status in the Indian Constitution. Similar case you can find in Singapore, where Malay, English, Tamil and Mandarin Chinese are recognized as official languages, right? In Switzerland, for that matter, French, German, Italian and Romanesque, and multiple multilingual societies have more than one or two official languages. So it promotes linguistic pluralism and accommodates variety of languages, scores of languages. They give equal chance and a statutory status to these languages. Then the fourth factor is vernacularization, and it is an initiative to restore. It's a restoration of an indigenous language, changing the status of an indigenous languages and reviving lesser known language of the society. And again, you can find many such efforts in African continent, where indigenous languages are given status of official languages, and then a lot of activities in are done to standardize them, modernize them, develop scripts for them. So it's a kind of revival of indigenous language, a vernacular, to that, to extend its functions of use and make it official and formal, right? So for that matter, Hebrew in Israel or Quechua in Peru. So lots of examples in India as well, right, where the dominant regional language acquired the status of official language. Marathi in Maharashtra, Tamil in Tamil Nadu, Telugu in Andhra, right? So they were all dominant languages used by vast majority of population in that particular region, and you can see the reorganization of state where these dominant languages become official language of the regional government, provincial government, and that's not the case that there are no other languages spoken in Gujarat apart from Gujarati, or in Maharashtra Marathi. There are other languages as well, and these governments are also including other lesser known languages or minor languages, extending their functions. And you can see the National Education Policy 2020 of India that promotes education in native language, education in mother tongue. So we'll come to that in some other discussion. So these are four factors for planning, right, of language. or motivation behind language planning and management, which are internationalization, linguistic assimilation, linguistic pluralism, and vernacularization. So these are the four major driving factors. Moshe Nahir, 2003, gives 11 uh, you know factors and records 11 objectives and goals of language planning, right? The motivation behind language planning, the trigger behind language planning. One is language purification. Now, there may be some problematic ideas like purification. This is a problematic idea, ideologically driven. But this is one of the factors, and it is prescriptive in nature, right? So the users don't determine the form and functions of language, but they are asked or prescribed that way. So the first factor is language purification. So it's a prescriptive use norms in order to preserve the linguistic purity, in quotes. Language by nature is impure, and impurity is normal and natural in all natural languages. But still, we have deliberate attempts to purify the linguistic forms, driven by certain ideologies, right? And we intend to protect language from foreign influences and guard against perceived language deviation. So, in a way, we try to freeze and standardize, create a benchmark as a, in quotes, pure language for the reference of its users. This is one. Then, language revival, right? So, it attempts to restore common use language which has a few or no surviving native speakers. It's more of a revival mechanism where language is given, a particular language with very nominal speakers is given a status, and domains are extended of its use, and it helps us to create corpus, grammar, encyclopedia, right, reference materials, a style sheet, and it revives the variety. So the second factor is language revival. The third is language reforms. Reforms, when we say reforms, that means interventions, external interventions in the process of development of the language, where a deliberate change in a specific aspect of language is done in terms of grammar, orthography, in order to facilitate and extend the use. So, grammar is standardized, new vocabulary is added, scripts are worked upon, made easier for users to use. So, these reforms are deliberate and prescriptive in nature, and they are done to, in quotes, reform the language. Then, language standardization, where prestige value is attached to a particular variety because of certain ideological political reasons, and it is developed as the preferred chosen standard language of that particular region. So, language standardization is another driving factor for it. Then we go to language spread. Another factor is language spread. In order to increase the number of speakers, in order to extend the functions of use, and in order to make the language more acceptable and inclusive. So language spread is another factor or motivating factor behind such planning. Then lexical modernization. Because of advancements in technology and changing domains of language, changing forms or the changing context of use, we need to modernize and update the language and its vocabulary, because you need to have a lot of terms and a lot of words to suit the purpose and the context of use. For example, let's say IT revolution and digital revolution has created a new digital space, a whole new digital space for language use, and you can find a lot of new items being coined in the language, right? Like to upload, to download emojis, right? Shortened forms, contracted forms, certain symbols. So they're all coming to language worldwide, not only India but everywhere. So this extended domain, a new domain, technical advancements, digitization process, requires all languages to revise their vocabulary items, borrow or coin new items to capture this change, digital change. So we need lexical westernization and modernization process as well, which is another motivating factor. Then terminology unification. To make the terms and jargon and technical words uniform across the varieties of a particular language, we need to plan it and modify and change it, right? Mainly in domains of science and technology, right? Because we have to update the vocabulary list as well of a language. Then stylistic simplification. This refers to simplification of language use in lexicon, grammar and style to make it more plural, acceptable and efficient and user friendly in a particular domain for use. It includes changing the use of language in social and formal contexts, right? Uh, then another factor is interlingual communication. So an attempt is made to blur the linguistic boundaries and to facilitate linguistic communication between members of distinct speech communities. So making certain changes and customizing the codes and extending the functions, we ensure the interaction between communities of different languages, different speech communities. Now again, this is a position which can be contested, because without planning also majority of South Asian societies are multilingual, and it's a natural evolutionary process that they have been interacting, communicating with each other. But it becomes one of the motivating factors for planning in those states where you have a lot of migration, settlement and a lot of changes in the linguistic ecology. So this is another motivating factor for language planning and management. Then language maintenance. It refers to the efforts initiated for preserving a group's native language as first or second language, where the pressures cause a decline in the status of that language. And it happens because of migration issues, because of any war or trade or colonial process. Lots of communities had to move from one place to other, settle in a new land, and they have lost their languages, right? Uh, if not language is not lost, then at least that particular community which brought that language, gets diminished over a period of time, after generations after generations. So this is also a motivating factor to preserve the native language and associated culture of a particular dominant group within language planning, where the language is extended in status, and it survives because it gets a statutory support, institutional support. Then another motivating factor is auxiliary code standardization, right? And what does it mean? It means that the standardization of marginal auxiliary aspects of language, such as signs for the deaf, place names, rules of transliteration and transcription, these are also done to facilitate better communication, right, and make it plural and inclusive. You can read Nahid Moshe, Language Planning Goals, a classification in Sociolinguistics, the Essentials Readings, edited by Christina Bratt and Richard Trucker, Oxford Blackwell 2003. For more details, you can study that. So there are multiple factors for language planning and management, and we require it. Again, to reiterate, this whole discussion and studies started in the post-colonial societies, where we had multilingualism, and in quotes, those societies where there was some linguistic chaos perceived in those societies. They were struggling to establish official language, rules for the language use, and meet the demands of a newly formed society, linguistic demands for newly formed society, accommodate more languages, right? And the best case is India after independence, if you study the linguistic chaos, linguistic conflict, and linguistic harmony. So this is why we require to understand. So India is the best case to study. However, you can also look at the language planning in South Africa, language planning in Singapore, Philippines, Peru, right, and other locations, other geographical locations in the world. India is a multilingual society. Indian Constitution Constitution promotes multilingualism. And if you look at the statutory provisions, we have Schedule 8, which promotes inclusion of more languages into its fold, giving a status to, a statutory status to different languages spoken in different regions. We will try to understand the types of planning, right, in our next video, in our next class. So for now, this is what for language planning, and we will study types of language planning in our next video. You can look at your own case, you can look at your own exposure to a variety of languages and for a variety of regions, right? And you can see the language policy followed during your school times, right? What is the status of your native language, your mother tongue, vis-a-vis your exposure to a dominant variety that you speak and use in official domains. The case of Hindi, the case of English, or the case of any dominant regional language in your region. So lots of issues will come to you, lots of things you can observe around, and we'll talk about Indian language policy in some other video. This is for now. Thank you very much.